somos hartos. Hoy día quiero presentarles, tenemos el honor de escuchar sus genialidades y de las últimas cosas que ha hecho. Algunas de estas no las conozco yo tampoco, así que va a ser muy interesante saber qué es lo que ha estado haciendo. Tenemos el honor de tener con nosotros hoy día en esta charla informativa que apunta, más que a hacer una charla, apunta yo creo que a compartir con ustedes un poco una reflexión y una discusión respecto de qué es diseño, ¿no? La charla se llama Design Is. Conversamos con Praveen hace un rato atrás respecto de cómo, de qué conversar hoy día, y creo que además lo interesante de esto es que ustedes también de alguna manera planteándose esas preguntas. Si ustedes están interesados en ingeniería en diseño, la carrera que nosotros dictamos en el Design Lab, también se hacen esta pregunta, ¿no? Y cada uno de ustedes probablemente piensa, interpreta, reflexiona respecto de esto de una manera distinta y tiene un ángulo diferente. Praveen, Subramani, estudió, hizo una licenciatura doble en Electrical Science. Voy a empezar en inglés ahora, así que me voy a pasar al inglés, el que tenga preguntas en español, pero para no dejar a Praveen completamente colgado de la introducción, a pesar de que él habla bastante español y probablemente pueda contestar sus preguntas en español si alguien al final no se atreve. But I'll switch to English. So Praveen has a Bachelor of Science, which is a licenciatura from Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, and also from Urban Design. And I think that's, to me, that's a very kind of symptomatic condition from Praveen. He has kind of this double-lobed brain. No, he has like, on one hand, the engineering side in him is about how to problem solve, and on the other hand, the other side of his brain, the urban designer side, is probably how to ask a better question that becomes a problem that needs to be solved, kind of. Praveen, in many ways, I think, resembles kind of the questions that you probably have today. He studied some time ago, not so long ago. He's much younger than most of us faculty here are, but he studied two different career paths. And I think that resembles a lot what we are trying to do now, years later at the Design Lab with design engineering, which is the career that you are thinking of choosing now, because it combines these two kinds of or ways of thinking about design, about creation, about inventing things. He did both of these studies, engineering, electrical engineering and computer science, and urban design, both at MIT. And then he went to obtain a Master of Science at MIT at the Media Lab. His CV says at City Science. In reality, I knew him when he was doing this at Smart Cities. Smart Cities was a team that was led by an architect, William Mitchell, who was also at that point my advisor. So he was an advisor to him and he was an advisor to me. I think in many ways he was a mentor for many of us. And he was already there combining these two things that he learned in his undergrad, the engineering side and the urban design side, because I think, and this, I am maybe taking a liberty here, I think Praveen always has had people at the center of his preoccupations. He believes, I think, that people should have a better quality of life, and that we, from a designer perspective, are kind of charged with that problem. We need to try to find ways on how to make people's life better. And he chose this approach from both the perspective of how do we live together, and that is the urban designer side on him. What do we do when we do this collectively, not just alone as individuals, but when we are all together? And from his engineering path, probably because he was influenced by the electrical engineer side of that, in terms of what is the footprint of all of us living together? what are the consequences of all of us living together in cities? What are the good sides of that, and what are the bad sides of that? He finished studying at MIT, and then he started designing interfaces at Apple and at the Media Lab. And I remember when he was combining the different skill set, the multiple skill set that he learned and he obtained from his education at MIT, going into the industry and realizing that sometimes the focus of the industry was on consumers, on product design, on designing interfaces, the way that we interact with technology. And I remember having long conversations about, on one hand, our interest in the city, but on the other side, on sort of this backstage side of services for people in a city that have to do with how do you interact with mobility systems, with products, with technology at large. We were extremely fortunate to have Praveen, a much younger Praveen, visiting us for a year. He was a visiting professor at the school. He was teaching a studio. I think it was second year studio, Praveen?
I think it was second semester, first year with Francisco, Taller de Objetos.
So they taught together a studio that I think in many ways marked the beginning, the foundations of the school when we were just starting at the very, very beginning. It was a privilege for us to have him. And then after a period where he was in Chile, he went back to the US. He's now located in San Francisco. This is where he's based. He went to become a product manager at Google, working for Nest Labs. If you go to any electrical store here in Chile and you go to Home Center, for example, and you look for thermostats that are automated, that make automation at home, a process which we call domotics, right? Which is the automation of domestic processes. He worked very intensively in that particular product, and he collaborated in many others. Then he jumped onto again, because part of his main interest, even from the Media Lab, was electric cars. In fact, we collaborated probably at MIT for some time on designs that we were working with the Smart Cities group on electric cars. He went on to NIO. NIO is a fantastic, kind of hidden in Chile still, but one of the greatest electric cars producers in the world. In fact, if you know Tesla, because I'm sure that all of you know Elon Musk, well, NIO is the Chinese Tesla. And in fact, they produced a faster, cheaper, like half the price of a Tesla and faster than a Tesla car in China. So expectations are that because I just heard a couple of news about NIO, during the pandemic, their revenue jumped 80%. So they are growing massively even during the pandemic, because the expectation is that NIO is going to become the next super giant of electric cars in the world. We have to see when they arrive to Latin America, but for sure in the Asian market, they are already making a big mark. And then he was product and service experience designer there at NIO. Then he jumped to probably the largest company in car sharing today, which is Turo. Turo, in case you don't know what it is the exact copy of what Airbnb is to hotels, but for cars. So as opposed to Uber, where you actually call and somebody comes and you use the car as a taxi, as a cab, Turo is you can rent your car for other people that are going to use it for a period of time and then return it. So it's like an Airbnb for cars. And Turo is now one of the largest growing companies in terms of car sharing, and is part of the large crisis that car rental companies are having today. Car rental companies have had to reduce their fleet of cars because of the price that they charge. And this has sort of democratized the idea that everybody, if you have a car and you're not using it because you take your car, you go to the office, you leave it there and it's parked there for a number of hours, you can rent that car, make a revenue, and then the car is going to be there back when you need it to go back to your home or something of that kind, right? Now, Praveen is Senior Director of Product Management at Turo. So if you have traced the small path that I have draw, he started in school trying to learn from different fields, from computer science. Probably part of the interface design came from interest at that very young age, from electrical engineering, and probably some of the papers that he wrote while he was in Chile that had to do with the electrical grid and the power consumption that we all produce as cities, as citizens collectively, came from that side. And his permanent interest in what do we do as a collective body of people when we live together in cities come from his urban design background. So he's already a collage of knowledge, a collage of skills. The result of that combination is an amazing and surprising career that he has found, jumping from one field of innovation to the next field of innovation. To me, is really an honor and a privilege to have Praveen today. I can't wait. I'm eager to see what he's going to show to us. And I hope all of you can join in a small virtual applause to welcome Praveen to this lecture today. So Praveen, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much, Sergio, for a very warm introduction. And it's so wonderful to see so many familiar faces. Let me just go ahead and share my screen here. And can you let me know, can you all see this? Great. Yes. Well, perfect. Well, thank you again for such a lovely and warm introduction. It's great to see Pablo, Francisco, so many familiar faces from my time there at UAE in Chile. So what I'd love to share with you today is really a series of case studies and examples that I hope might help challenge your notion of what design is. And when we think about design today, you may have some ideas from things you've seen in the media, maybe things you've heard from friends or experiences you've learned in classes. But what I hope to convince you of today is that design is actually maybe much broader than what you think it could be, and much more impactful than maybe what you think it could be. But before I do that, I want to just give a quick intro, and sort of you really covered a lot of this, so I won't spend too much time here. But by way of background, I'm a product manager. I like to consider myself also a designer, an engineer, a technologist, and an urbanist, and a pizza maker. I love to make pizza. I studied, as Sergio mentioned, at MIT in the Media Lab, and I've taught courses at UAE with Francisco. We taught a taller in 2013 together. I've also taught at MIT and at Stanford and at an online school called Product School. And as Sergio shared, I've worked at a combination of companies that actually seem maybe very different on the outside, but I think actually have a common theme and a common thread that I'd love to share with you today. And if you look at some of these organizations, whether it's UAE or Apple or Google or companies that you may have heard of, as well as maybe more nascent startups like Turo, there's actually a common thread to all these things. And it's really that combination of fusing technology in a way, design and technology in a way that generates impact. So it's taking the best of the problem solving skills, it's taking the best of the ideation, the creative process that comes from design, and the human-centric aspects of design that empower people to think about problems from a human-centered standpoint and turning those into impact. So as you think about all of your, your future career choices and your future program choices, one of the things I'd love to hear from you is when I say the word design, actually what comes to mind for you? And you can put this in the chat, or you can come off mute and just say a couple words. What comes to mind when I say this word?
I can say creating. It's a really good word to define it.
Creating. I love that. I think that's spot on. Anyone else? I think a strong theme around creation and creativity. I love that. Any other words that come to mind, themes that come to mind for you? Problem solving, absolutely. A big part of design is problem solving. One more. Improve the life of people, beauty, innovation, absolutely. And so, yeah, in some ways it sounds like you already have an incredible mastery of this, because I agree. I think design is all of these things. And what I'd love to share with you today is the story of what design is and what design can be through 3 sort of case studies. And so you'll see these case studies that sort of come in and out of this narrative and this story. And we'll look at various examples of projects that have actually used both the best of sort of technological engineering skill sets, as well as the creativity, the problem solving, the human-centric nature, even the beauty that can come from the design angle of things, fusing them together in a way that drives impact for the world and for the people that are using these products, these services, or engaging with these installations. So first off, what I want to share is often what's an early process in design, which is discovery. So much of design is really about understanding the world around you, about understanding how people are interacting with products, goods, services, objects, art, anything in the world around them, the city, even at a larger scale. And to do that, I'd love to share with you a case study from some of the projects I've been working on recently at Turo. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's a peer-to-peer car sharing app, as Sergio mentioned. You can imagine very similar to Airbnb for cars. So you can list your car to earn money if you want to make money off your car. And then if I need access to a car, or I want to try a specific car or a new car, I can come and book that. And so, it's easy to look at an app like this and say, this must have all been, sort of engineering or software development work to make this. But actually, a lot of design work and a lot of research and a lot of user research and customer research went into making this what you see today. So, like many case studies in design, this starts fundamentally with a problem. And when we started early on in Turo, our vision was that our hosts who list their cars and our guests, who are the ones who book the cars to drive them, would meet in person and exchange their keys once an arrangement has been made. So let's say I want to make money off my car, and Francisco's booking my car, and I want to let him have access to it. We'd have to meet up in person, and I'd have to give him my keys. And over time, what we saw is many of our customers were starting to build larger and larger fleets on the platform, because there was an opportunity to basically make more money by adding not just one car, but maybe 2 cars. Maybe I'll actually go and buy a 3rd car so I can earn even more. And over time, that turned into customer experiences that look like this, where in order to be able to run a business with 3 or 4 cars, I would have to start investing in things like lock boxes to keep all my keys. Maybe I'd have to invest in a parking lot because I don't have enough room to store my cars. And so over time, we started to see all these challenges of what would happen when our customers started scaling up their businesses. And so what do we do to sort of unpack this? We turn to our design skill set and our design toolkit. And really fundamentally, design is about understanding. It's about discovery. It's about really getting into the mindsets of people who are interacting with your spaces or your products or your services, whatever it is you're designing. And so these are some photos of our design and our research team out in the field talking to some customers and some users of our app and of our car sharing service. And one of the things we learned from this is that the experience of actually having to find a physical key is very, very challenging. So in some cases, our hosts and our guests would meet each other and they would do this physical exchange of the keys. I would hand you my keys. But in many cases, that would take too much time. It was too time consuming or not convenient. So often a host would leave the key maybe hidden in the car, or they'd put a lockbox or something like I showed earlier. And really, this started out with the process of inquiry. We took notes, we took photographs, we brought cameras out, we tried to document and discover what was going on in the world around us in a very detailed and rigorous way by putting ourselves in the shoes of people who are actually using our products, our services, and interacting with these spaces. And what we uncovered from some of this research was that people wanted an easier way to access vehicles. They wanted they were booking the car through a mobile app on their phone, and they wanted to be able to access vehicles in that same way. And so what we took on to sort of address this is we built a little prototype of a small device to allow a user to actually unlock their car directly from our app. So instead of having to go and find a key or search around for where is my host to provide me a key, you could just install this small device right into your car. And then for someone who's booked it and is approved to use the car, they can access it immediately right from the phone. And so this, of course, led into sort of a technological exploration. This is now putting on that engineering hat and that problem-solving hat from an engineering perspective. How do we then go and build the technology to enable this? And of course, getting into some of the nuances of creating the electronics, creating the enclosure for this, et cetera. But what I want to leave you with is that this process very much started with asking a human question. What is the problem that a user is experiencing? What are ways we might facilitate it? And the technology here really just became a means to an end. This was a technological solution for a human problem that really started with that process of inquiry, of discovery, of asking, how could we make this better? How could we make this easier? And getting into the field, putting ourselves in the shoes of real customers. And of course, over time, we were actually able to turn that into a software design experience as well. So our product design team, which thinks a lot about UX interfaces, user experience interfaces, and designing a customer journey around it, was able to create a software experience. So today, a user can just find this car directly in our app, go up to the car, push a button, and unlock it immediately. And it's as simple as just pushing, 1 or 2 buttons to lock or unlock the car. Now contrast that to that scenario you saw in the beginning where you're digging around for keys in a lockbox. And actually, some of the skills you might learn in an academic setting are very, very similar to the ones we use in the world of business to address some of these problems. So this is an example of that similar early discovery and ideation process from my time at NEO, where we were looking at opportunities to create autonomous vehicles and find what use cases would we unlock if you didn't have to drive every day, if you could sort of put your steering wheel away and have all that time that you spend in the car back for other use cases. And that, of course, turned in over time to various forms of prototyping, which I'll talk about more. These ideations, this discovery, this putting yourself in the shoes of other people, turning into prototypes, turning into concepts that we can then test and validate and build on our hypotheses and our learnings from it. So it's all part of this larger process. And of course, this is very similar to the skills that you might learn even in an academic setting. One of the things you'll be challenged to do with a career in design is ask questions. It's inquire about the world around you. It's ask provocative questions, ask the questions about why. Why is the world this way? How can we make it different? Why should we make it different? And much of that process of inquiry and discovery is really core to the process of design. And I think you'll certainly have a chance to do that as part of academic explorations as well as research explorations as you think more about design and the fusion of design and engineering as a path. So of course, discovery is a huge part of it, but discovery often, the road does not end there. So design is also prototyping. Design is testing, it's validating ideas, it's putting an object or a service or a concept, could be of any scale out into the world and using it as a way to gather feedback and to improve upon that idea and that hypothesis. So to share this story, I want to tell you about the journey of creating the interior of an autonomous car. And this was a project that I worked on at NEO, which, as Sergio mentioned, is one of the biggest electric vehicle manufacturers, primarily focused on the Asia market right now, but I think is actually now manufacturing electric vehicles at even a faster rate than Tesla or some of the other leading producers. And so, this might be the end result of years and years of complex design, engineering, even policy work. But how does a product like this or a service like this end up being created? Well, it actually starts out very simply and in a very straightforward manner that may not feel too unfamiliar to what you see around your university. So this is how that started. This is the beginnings of that car you saw there, and you can see this is a very, very simple prototype. It's a pallet. It's a shipping pallet on the bottom. It's a little bit of aluminum frame. It's a laser cut piece of plywood essentially, and again another just very simple piece of steel. And so you might ask the question, what does this tell us about building this car? But I assure you, this is actually where this process started. It started in a very simple, low fidelity, and very down-to-earth manner. And this is the type of prototype that I think any of you actually might be able to build right now with the skills you may already have, and certainly would have if you were to partake in a career in design and engineering. But so what were some of the questions we were looking to answer with this prototype? Well, we had this vision that if you're in an autonomous car or even a semi-autonomous car, maybe you don't need all of your interior space consumed by something like a steering wheel. Of course, a steering wheel is for driving. If you're not driving, why do you need the steering wheel, taking up space and consuming the cabin the whole time? And then what is possible if you're not driving? Maybe you can watch a movie. Maybe you can join a lecture. Maybe you can be on a video conference or on FaceTime or Skype with your friends and family. And so this started to unlock all these potential solutions to this problem that we identified of, if the car's driving itself, at least for part of the time, what if the steering wheel could just disappear and the cabin could then become a new transformative experience in which you could focus on these other use cases, entertainment, productivity, anything you'd like to do, and all that time you gain back when you're not driving. And so this prototype you see here was actually a very simple study of just this action of retracting the steering wheel. And so all this prototype was designed to do was help us understand, is this idea of even having the steering wheel disappear, is it feasible? what might be some of the ergonomic constraints, how does the human relate to it? If you're sitting in that driver's seat, what does it feel like to retract that steering wheel? And from there, we went on to increasing levels of fidelity. So we added seats, then we added some screens. And so just very small, piece by piece, very small increments, we were able to create this prototype and turn it into a richer experience. Then we had this insight, what if the steering wheel itself could actually be more than a steering wheel? And again, this all came out through the process of prototyping by creating small increments that we then added on to something that we created before. What if the steering wheel could actually be a mechanism of feedback and give you insights into what's going on in the world around you? So for example, if you are driving in autonomous mode and the car is driving itself, at some point it may need to alert you that it needs your assistance. You need to get involved. So an example of this could be you're driving on the highway and you're about to exit and the car can only drive autonomously on the highway. It needs to sort of escalate control back to you as the driver. So what if the steering wheel could be a modality of communication and say, through color, through vibration, through haptic feedback, through lighting, could it give you feedback that you need to take control? Maybe it flashes red, maybe it vibrates or something to give you some feedback that you actually need to take control of the vehicle. So we started prototyping the steering wheel itself. Then this got sequentially higher fidelity. So this is using processes and tools now like 3D printing to build prototypes, a lot of fabrication tools like laser cutting, some small electronics using tools like Arduinos, and again, all tools and skills that you would have access to in a program learning about design and engineering together to build sequentially higher fidelity prototypes. And the goal of each prototype is to learn something new. You can really think of a prototype as just a small experiment. What are you trying to learn from putting this object, this service, this building, whatever you're designing into the world, building a small iteration on it, using that to collect feedback, and then building the next iteration on it. And over time, we started to put these pieces together. So we felt confident about the ergonomics of this steering wheel after prototyping some of the enclosure with techniques like 3D printing, with techniques like using CNC routers, et cetera. And then we decided to combine this together with sort of our insights around this light ring. Could the light ring be a modality or a mechanism for communicating information to you as the driver? And then we started to layer in these other use cases that we thought about. So what if we could, for example, unlock an immersive content experience inside the vehicle? Again, if you're not driving, maybe you can enjoy the inside of your vehicle as a cinema, as a movie theater now, because you don't have to focus on the road. What additional use cases sort of open up? So we started prototyping an immersive display that could be part of this interior cabin experience. And then we connected those things together. So now we've got our steering wheel, plus our light wheel, plus our immersive display. And you can see the prototype sort of getting slowly but surely higher fidelity with every step of the way. And of course, a lot of this involved, very much a combination of both design and engineering skills. So these are some videos which show you, kind of the combination of design of thinking about the form factor, the enclosure, how a user is going to interact with this. What are the ergonomics of how your hands place on the steering wheel? But then, of course, a big part of that design and prototyping skill set is, of course, making these real and making sure we can actually test these. And so you can see a series of iterations here of testing different functions and modalities of this steering wheel. So of course, we wanted it to be able to act like a normal steering wheel. We wanted the light ring to be able to have feedback and give different kind of cues and contextual information. So we thought color was a very interesting modality for which to communicate the state of the vehicle. Maybe different colors can represent different actions you might have to take as the driver. Maybe it could alert you of danger if there's someone in a lane near you. And then, to unlock this vision of giving you more space and more room back, we of course had to prototype this idea of retraction. So when you go into an autonomous mode, maybe you're driving on the highway, can the steering wheel just disappear? Can it go out of the way? And can it be a mechanism for you to have more space in the cabin of your vehicle? And with every sequential step of the prototype, we basically just added in one more piece. Again, we're testing each component, and within each of these series of testing, we're often having real people come in and test this. So we're having people sit in the chair, we're having people put their hands on the steering wheel, they're giving us feedback, we're observing them, we're getting information on how real people are using this in an everyday fashion. And so while it may seem like a big leap to go from that small wooden model that you saw in the early slide to that finished car full scale, this is all just the process of prototyping and the process of designing that we use to get there, step by step, increment by increment, as we went on that process of creation together. Now, one of you mentioned this, that design is problem solving, and I love that mentality, and it's absolutely one that I've seen throughout my career and throughout my academic research. The design really it's a lens for unpacking very complex, very knotty problems that exist in the world around us. So one of the problems and the opportunities, now this is shifting back to Turo, that we saw is that we have cars all over the country and even all over the world now. And there's a lot of interest in folks picking up cars at airports. So you can imagine flying into Santiago Airport, for example, and maybe if you didn't live in the city, you'd want access to a car for a few days. So what would you normally do? You might pick up a rental car at the airport. In a peer-to-peer car sharing model, that doesn't always work so well because someone may not live nearby the airport. So for them to actually go and bringing the car over to the airport could be a significant hassle for someone to bring to you. So how do we start unpacking this problem? How do we use our design hats and our design skill sets to problem solve here and really get an outcome that we wanted? Well, again, this all started with putting ourselves in the shoes of an end user, putting ourselves in the shoes of someone who's going to actually use this in a very human-centered way. So it started with this vision of, imagine I could land in the airport, and right as soon as I land, someone pulls up in this nice new car, in this case, a great electric vehicle, and it's as simple as I, load my bag into the back of the car, I drive off on the car, and it's that easy. So how do we go about actually making this experience a reality? Of course, it's a lovely sort of set of imagery, but how do we go about making this real in practice and actually shifting human behavior and persuading people that this is something that makes sense for them to do? Well, it all started with that same process, that very same basic set of discovery, that set of prototyping. And it started with this idea of asking questions of, how do we create the right incentives and the right structure and tools for people to actually take on this interaction of driving their car to an airport, dropping it off, having someone else pick it up? So very similar to the same process we used for prototyping the steering wheel or discovering how people were unlocking cars in the field. It all started by mapping out what we saw as sort of a user journey. So we went through and thought about every step of the trip along the way, from booking a trip to making plans about what you're going to do once you land, to picking up the car, to dropping off the car, and just mapping this out all in a very, very discrete fashion, in a very organized fashion. Again, leaning a lot on those discovery skills and those prototyping skills. And then focusing on various prototypes. And I think one of the exciting things about prototyping in the software space, often people assume that prototypes have to be technological, but in many cases they don't. I mean, you saw, for example, just the very simple steel and plywood steering wheel model. Similarly, when we're prototyping a software interface, this could be done on a whiteboard. This could be done on paper. So one of the tools we use for prototyping and problem solving in designing software is we will make mock-ups, but then just print them out. And we'll use that as a forum for prototyping. And it's much faster and it's much more iterative and collaborative. So using these sort of lower fidelity tools, we can actually move faster. It may sound a bit counterintuitive, but if we invest a lot of time into building the perfect piece of software, we've actually, in many cases, overinvested in that because we don't know if it's even the right direction yet. So we start out very simple. We start out at very low fidelity with things like whiteboards, paper prototypes, even printouts of interfaces. And what we emerged on through this, again, this discovery, this prototyping, and this problem-solving process, always keeping people at the center of it, is that we saw this opportunity to basically use earnings as an incentive to get our host to put cars where we wanted them. So imagine you're a host and you live in, Providencia. What if we told you we're going to pay you $200 to take your car to Santiago Airport, or if you move your car over to Las Condes, you can charge an extra $10 a day, or if you move your car to Vitacura, you can charge $75 a day. So we saw this opportunity for using an interface to communicate supply and demand in a way that really encourages hosts to change their behavior and how they actually interact with our service. And that led to a whole set of product features that today we call delivery within the Turo app. And the core basis of delivery is, again, a very human-centered design approach to how do we create the right incentives for you as a vehicle owner to put your car somewhere or bring your car somewhere where someone else might want it. So this is an example of what a host might see if they live in Los Angeles. Maybe they can see that there's a lot of demand at the airport. People are flying into the airport and want access to a car. Maybe they can see there's a lot of demand at a train station or at a local hotel. And then we've given them the tools to actually list their vehicle at those locations, even if they don't live there, and they can charge different prices and get feedback on that using real-time supply and demand patterns. So again, we started out with a very complex and almost intractable problem. How do we get cars from point A to point B? And we use that skill set of discovery, of prototyping, and of problem solving to create a solution that was a mixture of guidance from software, but a lot of it really depends on human behavior in the real world to shape that experience. And from the the traveler side, if you're the one booking this car, the experience is as simple as just picking a location and saying, hey, I want the car here. And you just see that automatically reflected in the pricing of what you would pay to access a car at a certain location. Maybe it's a bit more expensive at the airport, but you're getting the convenience of having it delivered right to you. Design is iteration. So one of the themes that I hope you've picked up on through a lot of these examples is that often the final version of something, whether it's a building, whether it's a product, whether it's a service, whether it's a piece of software, it's not created overnight. It's often created gradually and slowly and iteratively in many phases. And the goal of each iterative phase is really to learn just a little bit more than you knew in the last phase and use that input to then choose your next direction. Now that input can come from critique, it can come from expert feedback from folks who are experts in an industry. It can also come from testing. So you can test iterations with users, you can test iterations with occupants of a building if you're designing something at the scale of a building or a site or an urban form. And so to think about the iterative process, I think it's actually really helpful to look at some of the very tangible and practical skills that you actually might learn in a studio pursuing this career. So this is an example of an immersive installation that was designed by some students from our workshop in 2013. And what I hope you take away from this is that the final version of this is actually quite different from where it started. And it started out very simply with just looking at these small elements that then became a larger part of a larger immersive installation. And the goal of this installation was to have occupants and people interacting with this question their relationship to the environment. So rather than just walking by a plain white wall in a campus, could you have an interactive experience in which the campus is actually giving you feedback, or the building is actually giving you feedback or insights into something broader? And so this was a very iterative process. I couldn't find photos of it, but it actually started with just a single one of these modules. And then that turned into a larger set of sort of a panel of these. Of course, then the students thought about placing this in different sites in the university. So how did the relationship of this object they were designing and creative iteratively relate to the placement of it and the site in which it was located? And so even the process of location was an iterative process for them. They tested this out in different places. They looked at different lighting conditions. They found different corridors in which maybe there'd be more people walking through or fewer people walking through, and you'd have different experiences with it based on the site in which it was situated. And the site placement actually iterated the design itself. So one of the key changes that they made was they had started, I think, with a reflective panel on the outside, with this idea of having sort of a reflective interaction. But then they evolved it based on iteration and based on different placements to actually blend in with the landscape. So this, I think, was some scenery they took from behind the campus, looking up into the hills behind the Peñalolén campus. And they saw, based on a lot of testing and iteration, that this was more aligned with the immersive installation they were looking to create, having this sort of landscape built into their installation. So again, it didn't start like this. It actually went in various successive iterations. And as they learned more, as they tested more, as they learned different pieces of feedback and tried out different prototyping technologies, different fabrication technologies, they were able to create this amazing immersive installation, which was a fascinating case study in sort of how to interact with your natural environment and how to get feedback from the building around you. And of course, that manifests in impact of just the joy of getting to watch people interact with it, having the installation provide feedback to people interacting with this installation. So not just something that sits there as part of the static environment, but something that actually is part of a feedback loop and then becomes immersive, becomes reactive to the world around it. And along the way, of course, they learned a lot about the process here. They learned about sensors. They learned about how to use microelectronics. They learned how to laser cut. They learned how to fabricate. They learned how to use a variety of different materials. And fundamentally, they learned how to iterate. And so rather than letting the technology be the gating factor, the technology became an enabling factor. And so the technology was just a tool to help them realize this vision and keep iterating as they learn more about how people were interacting with it, as they learn more about what textures, what materials, what sensors they wanted to integrate into their prototype. And actually, this is the exact same process that we use in the world of industry. So that same iterative process that those students went through prototyping their installation, this is a case study from the controls for our vehicle, for that autonomous vehicle that I shared. So this doesn't look so different from that. This is actually just a set of printouts, you know, and I think any of you could probably make this with some of the skills that you have today or that you will have soon as you learn more about design and engineering. But we start at very low fidelity. We start with paper. We start with you know, basic interfaces, you know, a little bit of, you know, visual representations of buttons, and then we build out from there. So to prototype, for example, temperature control for the interior of our vehicle, we started by just making a paper printout, and we put that on top of a piece of foam. And then we said, this isn't quite tall enough. Let's add another one. And we just kept doing that until we had a rough sense of the form, the visual representation, the tactile aspects of it. We'd bring in people, we'd bring in women, we'd bring in men, we'd bring in tall people, we'd bring in short people, we'd bring in young people, we'd bring in old people. We had everyone use it and give us different input, different feedback on it. And you can see some of the core tools that we use to prototype this interface might be very familiar to you. It was things like foam, you know, cutters, we had, you know, glue guns, rubber bands, just low fidelity prototyping. And over time, this became more and more high fidelity with tools and technologies like laser cutting, 3D printing, CNC routing, and other technologies that we use to make this even more real. And of course, we never want to let the technology be sort of an inhibiting factor. So that's why we use these types of prototypes, this type of iteration to help us solve these problems. So very much aligned with the type of skill set that you'll have a chance to learn as part of the design and engineering curriculum. But fundamentally, what I really want to leave you with is that design is all these things. It's creation, it's problem solving, it's iteration, it's discovery. But more than anything, design is a mindset. It's really just a way of approaching the world. It's a way of deconstructing complex problems. It's a way of taking on huge challenges that otherwise seem insurmountable. And what I'm confident of is that if you were to pursue a career in design and engineering, what it's about is empowering you to have skills to unpack and disassemble these problems, and then reconstruct and create solutions to them using feedback from people, using insights, using information about the world around you. And this is one of the most powerful skill sets and tools that I think you can have in your toolkit as a designer and an engineer, because rather than having to rely on someone else to help you prototype or help you iterate, you have all these skills yourself. And so you can collaborate, you can get feedback, but you're not dependent on, you know, let's say being a business person who can't realize their own ideas, who can't bring any of their own ideas into the world. And so in my experience, it's been one of the most valuable skill sets that I've had, is this ability to create, to problem solve, to iterate and discover. And I hope that many of you find the same joy and the same opportunities that come from pursuing a career in design and engineering as I did. So I'd like to leave you with a quote from Bill Mitchell, who Sergio mentioned and was my advisor and I know an advisor and mentor to Sergio as well. But this quote has always stuck with me. And what Bill said was, it's important to get the technology and the policy right, but in the end, the way you break a logjam is by engaging people's imagination, people's desire, by creating things that they have never thought of before. So when we think about everything that design is, it's creation, it's discovery, it's iteration, it's problem solving, it's a mindset. I think Bill said it best, which is, you know, the technology and the policy, of course, are essential, but alone they don't yield breakthroughs. And that's where our design skill set and our creativity and our imagination really have to push the world forward. So thank you so much. And with that, I'd love to take any questions or comments you might have.
Bravo, bravo.
Yeah, so feel free to just chime in on the chat with a question, or you can come off mute, or you can post in the chat if you prefer.
Yeah, Praveen, I've got a question about it. I'm really interested and passionate about urbanism, how cities grow, and a perfect fit to grow cities. So how designing helps you be a better urbanism?
Yeah, it's a great question. So design and urbanism, I think, are fundamentally linked in deep ways. And so if you think about your experience in the urban environment, so much of it is designed or not. And what I mean by or not is sometimes the results of what we see in cities is the result of a lack of design. It's a result of a lack of coordination, maybe between different city agencies, or a lack of coordination between the private sector and the public sector. And I think if you look at the most inspiring cities, the cities that actually, bring out the best experiences, whether it's through quality of life, like, great transportation or access to clean energy or housing, often it comes from a very intentional mindset. It doesn't happen by accident. It happens because, groups of policymakers and technologists and designers and architects and urban planners come together with intention to create something that didn't previously exist. And so when I think about the relationship between design and urbanism, everything around you is often designed, whether it's at the scale of a building. You can look even, more specifically to urban features, take roads or bridges, for example. All of those go through a process of, how are those designed? What are the different criteria they need to meet? Are there bike lanes included? What is the relationship of a sidewalk to a street? So, if you're interested in urbanism, I think design is really a path to manifesting change on the urban environment in a very tangible and a tactile way. Now, I will mention there are other paths and explorations of urbanism as well. So there are folks that pursue, for example, urban planning, but with more of a policy-driven mindset. And that's important too. But what I've found is that by being able to shape the built environment around you, you're often able to have more direct impact on the final result and the final outcome than if you're just thinking at the policy level or something that's very sort of abstracted or removed from the actual human experience.
Thank you, Praveen. That's actually why I like urbanism. I think it's very important because the way I see cities here in Chile grow, it's like it's despises me. They just think about just part of the city and to grow that part of the city only. They don't think about the whole thing, because a community has to be connected. It's like a human connection that we all need. So if you disconnect the city and just build it one by one, it's not going to work. And it's something that I'm seeing every day. So I really think that's a problem, and I want to be a part of the solution. Thank you.
Other questions?
Gustavo Lutz says that he loves the foam prototypes.
Yeah, that's great. And one thing I really want to highlight is that almost everything I've worked on, whether it's, and I'm sure Sergio or Francisco or Pablo, you can vouch for this as well. Even the process of building, a skyscraper, it starts with a model. It probably starts with a sketch even before it becomes a model. It starts in a very simple way. And so it's easy to look at something like an autonomous car or a skyscraper or a Boeing 747 and say, how did this ever come to exist? But it actually started with very fundamental skills and tools. It probably started with a sketch or a diagram or a drawing. That diagram or drawing became a model. That model was iterated on, new pieces were added to it. And so when I think about the type of skills that you might need to, design a building or a plane or a car, whatever, or even a mobile app, a piece of software, they actually have an incredible commonality in these base skills of iteration, prototyping, sketching, creating something out of nothing and putting different pieces together. So really encourage the use of those, what we like to call lower fidelity prototyping tools, to just make something faster, be able to get more feedback on it, rather than trying to invent the perfect piece of technology or the perfect building in isolation without those iterative processes.
One thing that I would like to add to so this is less of a question, more of a maybe philosophical perspective. I think the pizza has always been extremely underrated. I love the fact that in some of the pictures you show the pizza. At the very beginning, I thought you were showing pictures of MIT, because I know that pizza at MIT it's kind of a permanent sign of work, of perseverance. On the other hand, I know that we have done our share at the design lab in like having pizza time, pizza sharing time. We have like this at least a couple of times a year. We have, and you were part of that. In fact, you organized one of these lock-ins. I think, in fact, the lock-in name for that ceremony was coined by you. I think you came up with the name of the lock-in, something that we used to do at MIT for the sponsor week, and now we keep doing it at the design lab. So, but the symbol of the pizza, the symbolic aspect of the pizza, is that, in fact, I would say 2/3 of what design is to have fun. So yes, you have to solve a problem. Yes, usually the problems are dramatic, are enormous problem, are things that produce people sometimes to engage in some kind of drama or that, you know, makes them decrease their quality of life, and we're trying to do the opposite, to change that situation. But as you are designing, you are engaged with these sort of serious problems, these complex problems, these problems that are of large scale, that are impactful not only in your local community, in your immediate circle, but probably like most of the times are problems that can be related to people in other places, are global problems. But while you're doing it, you're having fun. And I think one of the interesting things that you show on this is that you're designing this electric car. Of course, we cannot relate to, like, you know, what the impact of electric mobility is in the future, what the relationship is to like global warming and greenhouse gas emissions and all of that. But at the same time, you cannot not see all the laughs of the people sitting on that, you know, wooden pallet, trying to move a wooden steering wheel and sort of having fun and imagining, well, if I'm having fun doing this, other people would also. And because of that, the experience is going to be a better one, because we're going to be happier living that kind of experience than the one that we have today. And I think an interesting side of the way how you show things is not only like the fact that you can scale prototypes to like final products. You can scale that sort of very basic, almost it's less than a mock-up. It's like, you know, taping things with masking tape, like gluing them with hot glue. They are basically there to represent an idea, and then they can become like, you know, the fantastic Neo electric car that had kind of a transparent front, so you can actually see the road in front of you, and then you see the relationship between what you were initially doing and then what you see in the end, and then you can see that was part of that creative process, and that creative process was also like a very fun, very interesting, very enriching experience for everyone that participated at any capacity. And I think one of the things that explain why the people like us that choose this path are so passionate about it. It's not because we want to be super famous or we want to be super rich or we want to be super influential. It's because we have a lot of fun doing what we do, right? So we keep doing it. It's kind of, we cannot wait to find the next problem to tackle, because we know if we team up with the right group of people, we're going to come up with great ideas. We're going to fight probably a lot in the process. There's going to be a lot of discussion, but we're going to have a lot of fun, and we're going to come up with great ideas. So thank you for showing that part of design as well, which is not always talked about because it's not so academic in a way, but it's very connected to life. And the one last comment is, not only the faculty look very young in those pictures, also Jose Manuel Gomez, who was a student at the time and now here is in one of my Zoom small windows, was also there. And boy, he looked young at that picture, huh?
Yeah, I think those have been from 8 years. So it's so great to see, you know, all the familiar faces and how much the school and the program have grown since then. You know, if I can just add one thing to the fun comment, absolutely. I mean, I think it's core to the reason I think I'm in the field and so many of us are in the field, is it's not only are you solving problems, but you're doing so in a way that's fundamentally creative, it's constructive. And, you know, even going back to the first question about, you know, different lenses to approach urbanism, you know, you can come from the policy angle, you can come from a design angle, you could come from an environmental angle. I am confident that the designers have the most fun in addressing these problems, and not that all angles aren't important. Of course they are, but you know, if I can share one anecdote, and this was actually in the presentation, but we didn't spend too much time on it. So this is a picture from our prototyping exercise, and what we're testing here is actually this dial, and this dial is as a new interface to interact with the vehicle. So again, if the vehicle's in autonomous mode, you're just sort of sitting back watching a movie, you probably don't want to be using a touchscreen because you're going to be reclining and you're sort of sitting back in a theater mode. And we spent so much time, you know, investing in this dial and, you know, trying to get it perfect. We forgot to build an armrest. no one thought about it. We were thinking so much about the dial and how it interacts, and can you do touch sensing on top of it? How does the electronics work? And so we put a roll of paper towels there, and it was fine. It allowed us to do the testing. It allowed us to get the feedback we wanted. But these are the type of somewhat silly but sort of on the fly quick decisions and judgments you have to make. We had brought in people to test the car, but we forgot to build an armrest, so we pulled out a roll of paper towels. So hopefully that's a real life example of how at the end of the day we have a lot of fun, but we also make a lot of impact, and that's a big part of merging design and technology together in a way that can be both personally fulfilling but also impactful.
Praveen, there's another question. John Conrad says, "Hi Praveen, excellent lecture. I wonder, in your opinion, what is the biggest milestone in the design process of any company or startup?"
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think it's, candidly, it's something that will probably depend on what the nature of the startup is. Is the startup making a service or a product or a building or, influencing a city? But one thing, generally that I often think about from the design process perspective is getting a prototype or a concept to the place where you can test it with someone outside your own team. And I think this is true for products or services or buildings pretty much at any scale, when you can really get out of your own biases and your own mindset and say, when is this to a point where we can actually put this in the hands of someone else who might be the end user of this? So at the scale of a building, that could be, creating a model that someone can interact with or give some feedback on. For software, it might be a very simple paper prototype or something where you can actually go and get some initial feedback on. For a physical product, it might be a tangible prototype with which you can interact with. But what that milestone does, it allows you to go beyond your own preconceived notions, your own biases, and everything that's in your own head, which is important. But at the end of the day, you may not be the person who's using this product every day or inhabiting this building every day or using the service every day. So I think getting a prototype to a milestone where you can test it with someone sort of outside your own building or outside your own experience, in my experience, has been a very, very critical milestone for any product, service, startup, etc.
Thank you so much. Is there any other questions? ¿Alguna otra pregunta quieran hacer? Or we can start closing. You let me know.
Praveen, hi. Just a quick comment. Thank you for this. I had the privilege, I would say, of being a student of this 2014 class, the first generation of design in the second semester, with you and Francisco. Thank you so much for this opportunity and this talk that we had today. And also, thank you for what I think it marked our generation a lot. And in my case, I had an excellent time in that semester. I saw the first slide of the presentation and some of the pictures related to one of our projects. It was quite emotional to remember those times working on that. And I believe that you got better pictures of our design process than in the projects that we had on 2013. So thank you, Praveen. Thank you for this opportunity.
Absolutely, it was wonderful to work with you in the workshop, and I have a whole album of all these pictures, so I'm happy to share them with you if you want to see any other memories. And to your point, it's just documenting it's so much of it is about the process of creating and iterating. So that's why I know I tried to capture a lot of that. I hope you as a student were able to capture some of that along the way too.
Thank you.
And wonderful work on the installation. I still clearly I still think about it and remember it. I think it was one of the best projects from that workshop.
Bueno, yo tengo hay otra pregunta ahí. No sé si alcanzamos a contestarla rápido. Yo tampoco quiero abusar. Yo sé que Praveen tiene otro compromiso en San Francisco. Estamos con un time difference importante y no quiero robarle más tiempo de su compromiso. A lo mejor alcanza a responder esa última pregunta o si no, cerramos.
What kind of innovation do you think will be most important in the future?
That's a very challenging question to answer because there's so many different vectors of innovation. But what I would leave you with is challenging what I think are traditional disciplines. I think is always a recipe for success. I think there were, if you go 20 years ago, let's say there was engineering, and then there was maybe architecture. I don't know if even design as we know it today was a formal academic discipline. And then maybe you have chemistry and biology. Most of the most impactful innovations today are actually coming from a breaking down of the barriers between these disciplines. So whether that's research, related to the use of biology in fabrication, using, organic compounds to create new materials, new structures, or maybe it's the intersection of, putting a design process ahead of the engineering process and having it really integrated as a part of this user feedback cycle. I think erasing these traditional boundaries between disciplines and these walls that used to exist, again, in a more formal structure in generations past, has really unlocked a lot of innovation. So thinking outside the disciplinary boundaries and looking for those fringe areas that, when you're working on something and someone asks you, what is this? And you can't quite put it into a bucket, I think you're working on the right thing. If you can't put it neatly into a nice category and a nice pillar, that's a sign that it's truly innovative and at the fringes and at the boundaries of what we as creators and designers can think of and be capable of.
Thank you, Praveen. I think that's a perfect closing. In a way, that's passing the ball to all these guys here. No, it's since you are gonna undergo a new way of education, a new format in which interdisciplinary barriers are disappearing, are dissolving, and you're gonna be part of a new generation of multi-professional, post-disciplinary academics. I think that problem is it represents a very challenging, a very interesting, and a very deep question. And I would love to be able to hear you in 3, 4, 5 years from now, giving your own personal answer to that question. I think that's the best possible closing to a lecture that has been extremely inspiring. Thank you, Praveen, so much. I think I represent a lot of people at the school, the whole school. We hope to have you soon visiting Chile as soon as we can, as soon as the barriers, the physical barriers become again a thing of the past, and then we can have you visiting for a period.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.